This is the Constructionist podcast, where we take ancient stories, the person of Jesus, current events and topics, and help you construct a new Christian worldview that's relevant and loving to those around you. I'm your host, Kevin Bates. I'm a semiotician and community builder looking at the signs of the times to build a better future together. You are tuned into the Constructionist podcast, and tonight we are continuing our thoughts on the topic of the book, The Religion of Whiteness. The Religion of Whiteness has been an incredible read for us, and I'm joined tonight by Sharia Bodner and Jacob Flug. We are ministers and scholars of the Bible, and we try our very best to give great thoughts, insights, and just maybe even just noodle around in some subject matter that maybe some people are not willing or able or afraid to do. And so we're not afraid to do these things. And so we want to dive deep into the religion of whiteness, the topic, and discuss a worldview that is built on the principles of Christ. We're doing that through a clear and honest lens. We're being very honest with our own backgrounds, the very best that we can, and know currently we are unaware of some things many times, and so we discover them along the way with you, and we're excited to do that tonight. We hope to offer insights and perspectives that will help you in your journey towards a greater understanding of love and compassion for yourself and others. So this is an authentic perspective on an examination of this author, both authors, Michael Emerson and Glenn Bracey, The Religion of Whiteness. So if you enjoy the Constructionist podcast and want to support us financially, please go to the link in the chat or show notes on the social media platform you're listening to and visit our Give page. Go to the Patreon page at the Constructionists, or you can go directly to our website, resonatechristian.church. So first, this is our new website. And if you're interested in connecting into Resonate, we want you to go to resonatechristian.church. You can also download our app. Go to the App Store, either Apple, Google, or Amazon. Get the app. This will give you all the information that you need about our church, meeting times, and events. Get caught up on previous media, and you can listen to part 1 and 2 because this is part 3 of the Religion of Whiteness. So Jake and Sharia, here we are on part 3. Excited to be here. We are looking at, in the Religion of Whiteness, looking at chapter 5 and 6. Now, just to give those of you who have not been listening along the way, we're just going to give a quick summary. And Sharia, do you want to jump in and give us a quick summary? Are you prepared to do that just off the cuff?
Off the cuff and with my book in hand, sure.
Yeah, sure. Go for it. The Religion of Whiteness.
Yeah, so the Religion of Whiteness is based on 7 tenets and 3 practices. And as soon as I find them in my book, I will tell you all about them.
Yes. This is how racism distorts Christian faith, by the way. So as Sharia looks that up,
yes,
this is how racism distorts things.
Right. The idea that those of us who are white, who are in white culture, white Christian culture in particular, have probably been worshiping whiteness rather than Christianity without even realizing it. So the 7 tenets are a commitment to whiteness as God ordained or natural. Whiteness is the universal, the centering of white understandings and values, Christian nationalism, Black inferiority, and then the practices are the selective use of scriptures, an epistemology of ignorance, and the veneration of sacred symbols.
So the epistemology of ignorance. I'm going to write that down in my notes here because we're going to start with that.
Back to that.
We need to go back to that. So this entire study is honestly a statistical study, interview style, where questions were asked and then responses were given to the idea of, are white people superior? How does that play out in your religion?
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that immigrants should be cared for and policies be set around their safety? Questions like that. Do you believe there's a race problem in the United States? Do you believe that racism affects your church? Things like that were asked. And then you saw in the statistics that white people answered those in a disproportionate way to people of color, where people of color answered, yes, there's a race problem. Yes, race problems affect our church. Yes, there's racial inequalities. Yes, there is a religion of whiteness. When white people answered those questions, it was so disproportionate. It was sickeningly obvious
And
that white people just
um,
have this
worth
different
pointing
view.
out. It's worth pointing out too that white Christians and white atheists or non-believers or whatever were interviewed, and the you get that same disgusting disproportionateness between white Christians and white non-believers. So it suggests that there is something going on in white Christianity that perpetuates this.
Yeah, it's not just a white person or white people, it's white Christians. And yeah, in that study or in that statistical analysis, just to repeat what Sharia said, is that white atheists or white agnostics were also interviewed. And they agreed that there were racial problems in the United States. There were racial inequalities, that race affected government systems, employment, unequal pays, and unequal incomes, educational opportunities. All these questions were asked. And so white Christianity, there's a challenge in white Christianity or in Christianity amongst white people. And this author calls it the religion of whiteness, where we're actually worshiping or venerating or somehow putting in front of the gospel or putting in front of the Bible or putting in front of our faith some supremacy of whiteness or some power of whiteness at some level. I was just talking to Jake today about ignorance, and let's just talk about that, Jake, for a minute, because we were discussing, do you think that Christianity is a anti-intellectual movement? And your response was?
Mainstream is definitely anti-intellectual, but it was not founded as an anti-intellectual movement. It was founded as a mental assent movement. And so even like the great colleges, seminaries, scientific advances were all usually funded, if not participated in by the church and for the church. So like the best example I have is the Big Bang Theory. He was a priest that came up with it, or like the Renaissance era, where all the art and all of the advancement in science and technology during that time, that was all funded for and by the church. So it's only very recently that like especially Protestant Christians, I think, are anti-intellectual.
I would say evangelicalism more specifically.
I think you can, and I think that's even worse now. But what I'm referring to is in the Protestant movement, one of the major pushbacks was that the priests weren't the only ones to read scripture or that would have access to God or know God. And so we reject that higher education. We reject the higher understanding, the practice of learning is not a education or even like the Like learning new things is not a spiritual discipline anymore.
So why do you think? I mean, I understand in the old world, in the Wayback Machine, that Christians, Catholics, I don't know about Eastern Orthodox. Let's just kind of, I'll just say Latin Orthodox, Western Orthodox Catholics. We're very threatened to find out or to gain new knowledge that our world, the sphere ball that we live on, is not the center of the universe. That when that was discovered, that was a great threat, meaning that the people on Earth possibly were not the center of the universe. So now take this one step farther. Modern day, advance forward in the now machine. Now we're sitting here having this discussion that white people are not the center of the universe. And when we threaten that pride point, that white pride point, that lots of emotion is exuded, and it's like a time bomb. I've experienced it with people. I've been at tables with people where they will just get intensely angry over the mere fact that you're just talking about racial injustice ideas. You could be talking about racial injustice ideas from the 60s and they'll get intensely mad. I mean, not even the ones today, like 60 years ago, they will get incensed. I mean, they will be like blowing their top because you're just having a discussion about Martin Luther King Jr. So I just find it kind of like very ignorant. And that's why I'm starting with the epistemology of ignorance. It just seems like that we're walking around as Christians just stupid. Like we're just stupid. Like we're not even willing to have a conversation about science. White paper science. I'm not talking about Facebook science. I'm talking about white paper science where we're not even willing to accept basic theories. It's almost like we're questioning even gravity. Like some things that are just pretty standard, that gravity exists. And when you drop a ball, it goes down to the earth 9 point whatever meters a second, you know? So some of the basic tenets that we all have, kind of the fabric that has brought us together as human beings, right now is just being thrown out the window.
Well, I mean, if you look at history, like Copernicus, that's who you were talking about earlier, that humanity was no longer the center of the universe. Copernicus was the astronomer and mathematician that found that out, right? He was a Catholic canon, so I don't think quite ordained, but really high up in the Catholic Church. But I mean,
his role was to determine what was heresy and what wasn't, right? So he knew his stuff.
He knew his stuff, and he also knew that the Earth was not the center of the universe. So, and they tried to kill him for years because they couldn't handle this new idea that just rocked their world. And so, that was a foundation. The Earth being the center of the universe was a foundational belief, I think, from all the way probably from the beginning of human time to the 15th century. And so that the importance of humanity was so great that slowly is ticking away. What's interesting about the white conversation, though, that we're in, is that the foundation of Christianity, Catholicism, Judaism, those are not white religions. And so we're instilling something into it and making it completely different than what it was even founded as. And so as we're reacting so hard on it, it feels odd that people are rejecting it so hard when it's not even their thing to reject.
Yeah, but if we're not even willing to accept basic like data science principles, how are we ever going to get to sociological science principles? Like softer science principles, where those have statistics and metrics and values around them that are more sociologically, culturally driven. And the data becomes more of a perception or an experience versus I'm testing this in a lab and I don't believe what's going on in the lab. How are we ever going to get to I'm actually believing what's happening in culture? Like I just see this ignorance, anti-intellectualism, like almost breeding a sense of ignorance and stupidity within our communities that we're just going to struggle even getting to having a discussion about something that threatens my feelings, you know. And this is what this author's talking about, is race and racism is packed with feelings.
Well,
So
I think,
Shreya, take that. Like show us how racism is packed with feelings. Jake, jump in.
okay, so
Okay.
can I say something real quick,
You want to
Shreya?
go first?
No. I want you to do this. So I put a pin in it, but
Okay.
I think we have emotionalized the data across the board. So this book could have been written about, I think, anything the white Christianity, anything they hold as harbinger. So we think about all the emotions around climate change or global warming, right? And so it's this, I think, the same methods and the same understanding, be it racism or global warming, climate change, or even the COVID-19 outbreak. I think it's all addressed and attacked the exact same way. Go ahead, Trey.
Okay. So kind of the thesis statement of chapter 5 is that we cannot separate our thoughts and our actions from our emotions. Our thoughts and actions are always going to have an emotional source. And even when we are not sure that our emotions are appropriate to what is going on, they're still going to guide the ship. So it almost doesn't matter how much self-awareness we have, our emotions are still going to drive the ship. And so in this chapter, the authors did a study where they brought people in for really long interviews, like 2+ hours. They talked about their family, they talked about their growing up, all kinds of experiences, and then shifted the conversation to issues of race and racism, white privilege. And what they noticed is that in that shift in the conversation, they said the interviews were pleasant until the topic turned to race, and then the responses became shorter, sharper, and angrier. And this is in particular talking about white people who were interviewed. And so, like, one of the examples, they brought up the idea of white privilege, and some of the responses they got were, "I feel labeled," a made-up phrase to make all white people feel guilty. "I feel angry," "wronged." "Having grown up in poverty with an alcoholic father, I don't see that I had a whole lot of privilege." And so you can hear the strength of the emotions under these responses. So basically, these big emotions undercut any possibility for critical thinking. So no further examination or self-reflection can take place. And that's kind of where we really run into issues when it comes to white supremacy and racism. Those big emotions are so big that people can't even stop and reflect and imagine that people have a different experience than they do.
Yeah, we tend to with that rhetoric. I had an alcoholic father. I was abused by my mother. I don't see myself
Mhm.
as privileged. That's that old. There's an old adage that I don't know how hard life can be until I start living a hard life. So something like that. I don't. I only see my life in this lens, and I'm not experiencing other people's lives. So how do I even know really like like am I really living this hard of a life?
Mm-hmm.
I always thought that I lived this hard childhood until I really realized that I was raised by, I had grandparents involved in my life. I had lots of support around me that most people don't have that much support around them. And so I really realized in my older, midlife years that I I actually had a pretty good childhood. Um it wasn't that bad. So, but my perspective for a long time was it was bad. And that sure changed over the years. I really realized that, there's a lot of other people who are living really difficult lives. And we don't really know how difficult until we start living that hard life.
Yeah.
I want to
I
read one more paragraph from chapter 5,
Yeah.
unless you want to say something, Jake.
I was thinking about the interview process that you're talking about, and one of the authors in this book is black, and so I wonder who was asking those questions, and if they would have received different responses depending on who was asking the questions. Go
Yeah.
ahead, read your chapter.
So last week with chapter 4, we talked about the playbook for when a threat is experienced. And these are the 5 steps that you go through to eliminate the threat, basically. And so I'm going to read this chapter talking about how, as the interviewees started to feel threatened by these questions and the big emotions that those evoked, they then engaged the playbook against the interviewers.
Mm-hmm.
So, step 1 is identify the offenders. In this case, the offenders are Jamar Tisby and others who promote what is viewed as a highly problematic, non biblical view on race. Step 2, build a defense based on religion. The full petition says that the offenders and their message are profoundly unbiblical and goes into several ways it views CRT as unbiblical and anti white. Step 3, simplify the defense. The enemy is stated clearly, it is CRT. Step 4, proceed with the attack. The petition is used to draw attention to, defend, and stop CRT on this campus. Step 5, put the offender on the defensive. Jamar Tisby, the full petition calls him an outspoken apologist for CRT, and others of his ilk are believers in CRT, and therefore unchristian and dangerous.
Mm.
And that's chapter 5.
Yeah.
Emotions drive the ship.
I think that, if I was honest with my evolution of this and my emotions, 15 years ago, when maybe it was about 12 years ago, when I had adopted a child from a different country, and her skin is brown. She's a child of color. And somebody really encouraged me to go to a kind of a conference roundtable discussion called Race Talks. And I went to Race Talks. It was downtown Portland, and I'm sitting there in this, big conference hall. We're kind of hanging out. And then this event started. And, there was probably, let's say there was about 50% or 30% white people there, and then Everyone else were people of color. And we all just kind of sat around tables and had discussions about racial problems in the Portland area. And I was taken back. I was shocked to hear that these people had experienced these challenges. It's almost like blinders were on my eyes. I just didn't see it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then the next event that happens in my life, we had a catering event in one of our locations of our coffee houses. And it was called a Jack and Jill Club.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know what that was. And so all of a sudden, all these beautiful people and these beautiful clothes and big hats, and they were all women, walked in upstairs, African-American women, dressed just dressed up. And they all walked in and walked upstairs, and we had this catered lunch for them for this meeting. And of course, I was very interested in what is going on. And they formed the basically the post-segregated era, the first Portland Jack and Jill clubs since that era. And Jack and Jill clubs were educational clubs that in the segregated states, the children didn't receive a proper education and equal education to white kids. And so they formed the Jack and Jill Club because in Northeast Portland, there is and has been in our Oregon history, a larger Black population in Northeast Portland. And there's their specific challenges in those communities that this Jack and Jill Club were trying to address in that community. And there was lots of different challenges that they were attempting to address. So that was my second experience. What the emotion that brought up in me is I was angry. I was angry at myself because I had not, and here I am kind of like a participant, but almost like a viewer of all this. But what I noticed is that when anybody would bring the subject up, it would create guilt and shame and anger inside of me that I didn't know how to process. And over the years, what was happening to me is I was in a denial. I was in an acceptance. I was in I would even say, well, do all lives matter? And I would question that. Are we supposed to say that? Are we supposed to say Black Lives Matter? Are we supposed to say all lives matter? I didn't even know what to say there for a period of time. So in that evolution of me, I could understand these emotions because in my own deconstruction and trying to figure out a pathway forward for myself as a white Christian, but also a leader of a predominantly white church, but also a white Christian pastor that had been teaching certain rhetorics or certain frameworks, or only reading white theologians, only reading white commentaries, only, everything that I had learned was shaped by a dominant white school, dominant white theologians, dominant white theology. I hadn't even considered a Black theologian from Africa. I hadn't even considered a Latin American theologian or Peruvian Gustavo Gutierrez or somebody like that. I hadn't even thought about that. So my personal story of this is there was a lot of emotion that I didn't know what to do with for a long time. And it wasn't until probably really only a handful of years ago that I began to dig in and to really learn about, well, what does this mean for the pathway forward for the church? And when I attend other churches and I hear it now, it's like a lightning rod. I hear it and I go, that is racist. I hear like when somebody from the stage says a dog whistle, and I go, that is wrong. So I now am at least I have a lot more growth, but at least I'm like listening a little. I can hear it, and I can then begin to identify it. And I think that it takes a lot of just like really purposeful humility, intentional humility of just going, I'm a dummy with this. I need to figure this out. Otherwise, I am the church of yesterday. I'm the church of the religion of whiteness that's dying.
Mhm.
And I don't want to be a leader of that even philosophy. Cares about the dying church, right? I don't even want to be a leader of that philosophy. So it took a lot of, I guess, feeling aggravated, hopeless, um, anger, guilt, shame. Um, what I really was bothered by through the process, though, is when white people would just look at me and call me out on my whiteness. Right? That was really difficult because it's like, okay, so you were this last week and now you're calling me this week, like what? You didn't know this yesterday. Why are you saying that you've always known this? That was just dumb to me. Like the lack of humility of white people learning about white privilege,
At the same
and then
time.
just at the same time I was, and then hammering me, and then they would turn around the next day and act the same. So that was really a difficult moment. But I was, I guess, agitated, and um, I just thought it was bull crap, when somebody would be have hypocrisy like that. So that was all a part of my deconstruction, though.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And I think that really illustrates how we get past those big emotions. You have to be willing to sit with them without trying to pin them on someone or something else. Like you have to take responsible for what you're feeling. And then you have to be willing to listen to the experiences of people who didn't experience the same things you did. Um, and it takes time, but over time, those practices of listening and sitting with your own emotions do open up
mhm.
a way to be able to rethink and to not get stuck in these emotions.
Right.
I think the idea of racism is the massive complex, not like think of it as a structure. Um, and so when new information comes in that is directly against what you were taught in the past, you go through this like deconstruction and hopefully reconstruction. This you receive the information, and what you do with it, either you allow it to sit there and break and change your thinking, or you can reject it. And
Mhm.
so um, I forget what was going around this specific video a while ago, but it was things from our past that we were always taught that aren't true, right?
Yeah.
So the biggest one
George
was
Washington's teeth.
George
Is that what
Washington's
you were gonna?
teeth.
Is that what you're gonna
Yeah.
say? Yeah.
So George Washington's teeth were not wooden, right? They were made of
Right.
his. He would pull his slaves' teeth and make dentures for himself.
Right.
Um, and so our ideas, when they're conflicted and we are learning information that is the exact opposite of what we learned in the past, that may make things out to be worse. Like George Washington, right? Had
Right.
slaves. We don't really focus on the slaves of George Washington. I think Thomas Jefferson's out there somewhere, but we have memorialized these people so much that we're having to reconstruct their image.
Right. We've had to reconstruct and almost venerate every leader of our old world, because what they were doing and what they were participating in or what they believed to be true was very of the day. And what
Yeah.
was acceptable then would be complete anathema now. And so like to venerate somebody that was that ignorant.
Yeah.
Even like when you're in the Lincoln Memorial and you're downstairs in kind of the basement of the Lincoln Memorial, what Lincoln was saying about slavery had more to do with keeping the Union together than freeing people. And so that's a hard thing to absorb when you're starting to read his quotes that are etched in stone. You're looking at Thomas Jefferson and the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. These people did great things, but they also promoted and owned and traded like slaves themselves.
Yeah.
So they have that history that needs to be, I think, acknowledged and processed.
Mm-hmm.
And the book brings up reparations. As somebody like that has really thought about reparations, I think Canada has done a great job with Native Americans, as much as I can perceive just driving through. Now, how does that play out in the government and actually like boots on the ground help? I don't know. So they could be treated like horribly, and I'm sitting here saying, as far as I know, they're treated well. I'm like, that's how ignorant I am. But what I do know from being on the lands of what they call the First Nation people, which is a beautiful name for Native Americans. They're not Indians. They are not, in Canada, Native Americans. They're First Nation. They own, as far as I know, on their reservation land, they own into the earth and all the way into the heavens. So they're mining, they're jade miners, and up on this Cassier Stewart Highway, they mine jade. So when reparations are given, I don't know anybody that has a generous spirit inside of them that truly has that gift of generosity. They don't struggle with reparations. I think that it's the greed spirit that struggles with reparations. If somebody needs help or a leg up, or here's like a reparation to give you an opportunity, why not? In our generosity. And as Christians, we're called to be generous. So even that word reparations, it threatens the white greed, where I'm sitting there going, well, this is mine. I didn't do what my dad did. I didn't do what my grandfather did. I didn't do what my great grandfather did, right? I'm doing what I did and do. And we struggle just giving like $10 out of our pocketbook. That has a lot to do with my white greed and anger, I guess, towards you're going to take my stuff for something that I didn't do. Well, we give a lot to things that we didn't do. So the question that I have about reparations is, why, when you put the label of race and injustice, racial injustice, on this concept of reparations, why is it such a struggle? That becomes like an insurmountable wall. Like we give billions of dollars to a war that's not ours, to something that we didn't do, to something that we're not involved in, really,
Yeah.
right? But we struggle with giving reparations to people that have a historical oppression in our society. Any thoughts on that?
We showed it last week, I think, in that graph of what I'm trying to think. I'm sorry. Should you apologize for the past? Mm-hmm. And it comes up later on in chapter 6 as well, that the Christian nationalists, the religion of whiteness person, is very against apologizing for past and really even apologizing for future, but apologizing for past, listening to immigrants, all those things. And so, but when you switch over to people outside of that movement, it's like threefold apologizing for the past.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, we are told that we're, blessed through our generosity. And honestly, we spiritualize that into just tithing in the church. And if we tithe into the church, then somehow checks are going to come in the mail. When in fact, that's not true. The generosity was given to the oppressed, the marginalized, the put down in Scripture. And that's where we will be blessed, when we actually invest in people who have been historically and currently put down. So we talked about the epistemology of ignorance, but I also think that epistemology, what we talked about, of emotional ignorance. So we have intelligence, like mental intelligence, but then we have emotional intelligence. I think you hit on that, Shreya. It's really important to sit with emotions and process through them and really think, okay, why am I feeling this? And to not blurt out the first word that comes to my mind. And some of the white Christians out there, what this book calls the boundary enforcers, right? They start blurting out, like when they feel threatened, when I feel like agitated. Oh, you're bringing up race again. You're going to tell me that I'm privileged, and you're going to tell me that, I need to start giving money to people that, didn't earn it themselves, and all this kind of stuff. So Christians have a way of over spiritualizing everything. Christians really do have a magical way of doing that. And so we take all problems and we kind of spiritualize them. God's in control. He's going to work it all out.
It's not a race problem. It's a sin problem.
It's a sin problem. It's a God-sized problem, right? So we tend to over spiritualize things. We've done that for centuries about all kinds of stuff, but I've heard it in lots of churches that I've attended or listened to online, where they'll talk about race, they'll talk about racial injustice, and then they'll just kind of throw it up to God and say, well,
Let God.
Yeah, we have to let God handle this. When we are the agents of the Spirit, and when I think about the Spirit indwelling, we are ministers. The Bible teaches that we are ministers of reconciliation. Mm-hmm. And so we are the ones reconciling these issues, whether they be like disruptions amongst relationships or disruptions amongst racial injustices. We are the agents that go in with the Spirit of God to do the negotiated work. I mean, that's what a minister of reconciliation does the negotiated work to have reconciliation happen. Mm-hmm. This book actually talks about spiritualizing the idea of racism, like stick to the gospel. We just need to stick to the gospel.
Can we
not a salvational issue. Go ahead, Jake. What?
In the section on spiritualizing, something I thought funny is that, and it's probably I'm guessing a lot of people think this because they included it, that Jesus didn't talk about race, and neither should we.
I don't know who the Samaritan woman was then.
Or, the Good Samaritan, the Samaritan woman, the Romans, thinking that the New Testament was written in a time of extreme racism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they used to call people groups dogs.
Yeah, and like, yeah, it is a, it was a, it was a, and it was more of a racist system, not a classist system, which we'll get into a little later for it.
Well, racism and these topics are not necessarily a part of the sacred. Those are secular topics. And I actually haven't held that view of secular and sacred for a very long time because there is really nothing. Where's the defining line between secular and sacred? Is that are Harry Potter books secular, but Christian romance novels sacred? I just am not sure, like where that defining line is, you know. Um, and nobody does because there's no such thing. It's a false labeling of things that are just perception. Like this rock music, it used to be if Christian rock music was too hard, it was secular.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's secular music. Um, so there is nothing secular and sacred. So when you say stick to the gospel, honestly, this is the gospel that Jesus came to reconcile all things.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And we have a covenant with God and with people to love our neighbor. And so this is the gospel. And we need to address this as gospel work. Um, of course, paternalism, right? Where, you know, we are like almost like making sure that, you know, people fall in line and, you know, follow our plan. Like we dial things back and we don't like necessarily talk about these things. Don't be too disruptive. One of the things that I've actually seen plain as day is the weaponization of scripture, where we actually are using scripture as pastors and weaponizing it, teaching people to weaponize it to others, which is just scary business right there. I mean, I had I sat through a sermon, and this pastor actually was released from his position, thank goodness. But I was listening to this pastor just totally racist. I couldn't believe like I was sitting through this. I was so thankful that you know it's a short sermon. But he was just totally racist. I wish I would have gotten up and walked out. Like looking back on that, I'm like, yeah, I'm trying to be supportive because you know it's my friend's church and trying to just be there, and you know I had all those feelings, and I'm just listening to this guy just weaponize scripture. It was just crazy. Um, and then the labels and insults. So let's just talk about that a little bit because that's really common. We saw that on TV the other night. That people will use labels and they get offended, and then or they just think like that because you're talking about race, you're a Marxist. You're talking about race, you're woke. You're talking about race or racial injustice, you're a liberal. That's satanic. It's from the devil. You know, you're a communist. Um, the word fascist actually is used on both sides. You're a fascist. You're a fascist. You're a Nazi. You know, whatever it is that the one that Jake got a lot was an educated idiot. You know, you're just an educated idiot. So we have these labels. And have you guys ever gotten those labels?
You just said I did.
Well, yeah. Any other ones?
I mean, to my face. Well, yeah.
Yeah, I was called a
I mean,
socialist.
I got liberal apostate once.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Social justice warriors. I had somebody really slowly explain to me, like I was an idiot. They looked at me as I was talking about a certain subject. Well, you know, what they call what you're talking about and who you are is what's called a social justice warrior. Like it was an intellectual term.
Hmm.
And not
Yeah, I
just
won't tell
a
you who
mere
told me
term.
that, but I'll tell you after the show.
Very good.
Anyway, so what is a Marxist, Jake? Let's just be very clear about these terms.
I think if ever a term, this is as a good example, if ever a term is just thrown out there, just spend some time and Google what it means.
Right.
You're inferring to Google responsibly.
You Jezebel spirit.
Yeah, Jezebel spirit. So Marxism
This cracks me up.
is thrown around a lot
Not really.
with the race theory, because in a lot of race conversations we talk about the redistribution of power, of wealth, of position. And so as the pendulum has swung so far to the side, we have to swing it hard to the other side in order for equality to be met in the middle. And so that's why, especially in academia, like the race conversation is so extreme, because this pendulum has to swing eventually. We have to swing it.
Right.
And so that's where you have Marxism or socialist or lots of things come out. Marxism is a system of economics that was developed by Marx and Engels. Marx was a German philosopher and economist, and he dreamed of a classless economic system where the means of production were owned by the government. The government then distributes all wealth evenly amongst all people. However, you could choose which job you wanted. You could choose how to live your life. But his idea was that if you give people the freedom and the basic of life, what you would need to survive, which I think right now, if everyone received $36,000 a year, the entire world would be above poverty line, would be completely satiated all the time. And we have the money floating around by our three richest people to do just that.
Probably do that, yeah.
So
okay, so since you're an educated idiot, so bring that back to those of us that are entrenched in the epistemology of ignorance, right? Like break that down for me in my terms. I own a business. You own a business. The government owns the business. Who's the business?
I own a business.
So there's a famous cow cartoon out there of like who owns the cows.
Mm-hmm.
In Marxism, the government owns the cows and you get the milk.
Okay.
Right? In socialism,
who takes the milk from the cows?
The workers.
You get to choose your job. Whoever wants to milk the cows gets to do it.
Okay, all right.
In socialism, the idea is that everyone has ownership to the means of production. But socialism. That's socialism. And so then wealth is then distributed evenly, hopefully, as well. Like we do have socialist systems within our capitalist economy. So we have a mixed market economy where a lot of our policies are socialist. So like Medicare or Social Security,
even public libraries,
public libraries, public education, clinics.
Those have socialist overtones, but they're not necessarily traditional socialist programs.
Well, they are because everyone owns them and it's distributed evenly amongst all people.
Got it.
So I think
this is why in Finland, when you go to a park, the wood is there.
Correct.
For you to burn your bonfire, the government supplies the wood.
Yep.
You just go in and reserve the park.
Correct. So then
I meant campsite.
The only true communist socialist system that government that we have is Laos. sorry, the true socialist system that we have, the true government system that we have is Laos. Then you get into communism, which is a unit of government that, and there's two words here, the bourgeois and the proletariat. So you have the bourgeois, who are the rich oligarchs, and then you have the proletariat, which was the working class. So you had the rich and the working class. And so like in medieval Europe, you had the serfdoms, you had the lords and the serfs, or the slaves, the peasants, or whoever you wanted to be. So you had these extreme wealthy, and then everybody else. And so, especially in Russia and the communism, you had Anastasia's family. Help me out. What's their name? Rasputin and
Rasputin. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, what's the? I forget their.
It's the last czar.
The czars, yeah.
Well, anyways, but Rasputin was their priest, but the you had the last czars would own all of the units of production in that serfdom system, and that's why they changed it. And so the bourgeois was then taken out, and the proletariat then owns the units of production, so that the bourgeois can't. Bourgeois would probably kill.
So why does Russia get so much attention?
Because they're the other world power that has a different economy than we do. Mm-hmm. It's the same.
Russia.
But Russia still has oligarchs, which all the money. So in a communist system, there has to be a dictator in order for it to work.
So in Putin's world, since he's been elected over and over and over again through probably dishonesty by this point, or maybe just popularity, I have no idea. I mean, he basically is like a long-standing president, so it's like he's from that communist world trying to like have a capitalistic mindset. Yet I don't know if they've ever been able to break free from truly their systems.
I think it's just a people system, right? So you have, in order for a communist system to work, it has to have a dictator. A dictator, we have in the Western front, we think of a dictator as always this very negative person. But in pure communism, how it was supposed to be, this dictator was one that just pushed money out to the people. They acted autocratically, and they were supposed to be the ones that just redistributed wealth so that everyone would have enough.
Yeah.
And so I hope that makes a little more sense about.
Yeah. So their economic systems, their economic theories, and their forms of government.
But we're doing the same thing with CRT right now, that we've taken the theory of law, we've taken the theory of economics, and we just use those big terms to confuse people.
Or to just dog whistle our views and to get more rallied around us. Or to call out what we think is wrong or what we don't want talked about. Yeah. And what's happening in like smaller venues like libraries, you know, librarians are very intelligent people. It's not like you can become a librarian, you know, online certification. You have to literally go to school for years. And a librarian traditionally has been in charge of the library. What books are there to curate a well-rounded, facts-based library? What is happening in our libraries is counselors and mayors of communities, you know, that have like liberals and conservatives within them, or people that are struggling with these issues and not wanting to face racial injustices and things like that. They will attack librarians and libraries, or they will attack school boards and you know, an elected position of school board, and they will become micromanagers of libraries and school boards, pounding their agenda in place. So I've witnessed librarians actually making policies and instituting policies without elected officials' knowledge or input whatsoever. And so we have divided even local governments because of these types of issues, or we have divided school boards that don't represent actually the school. They're not representing the school. They're representing agendas, and they're representing anti-CRT agenda or whatever they are, whatever their issue that they're hammering through. They get elected into these positions just based on these dog
Popularity.
whistles and
Yeah.
this rhetoric.
So what's hard is, and what you're talking about is, when you look at libraries and schools,
Mhm.
those two things have free access points.
Mhm.
And so the very thing the marginalized communities need the most are libraries and schools.
Yes.
And so by restricting that, and by even speaking into it when they really have no business speaking into it anyways, it's just a form of hatred and racism that's beyond.
Well, think about how you get elected into a counselor position. So a counselor position, you can be anybody. And as long as you get the votes, you're in. So you could I could me dummy Kevin, right, just walks out there and he has no intelligence whatsoever, and I'm just walking around shaking hands and knocking on doors and passing out my election pamphlets. Vote for Kevin, right? Why? Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to put,
A pop
I'm going to
machine.
put soda pop machines in every hallway of our schools, right? It almost sounds like back in student government, back in high school, when the presidents or the president candidates would sit there, and in the student body president would sit there and promise things that honestly were completely illegal to do in the state. They would promise things. I'd literally, the student president promised soda pop machines in every hallway of our school, which wasn't even like it wasn't even allowed. So it's almost like that everyone is going around shaking hands and knocking on doors, those that want to be elected, and then they're speaking authoritatively into materials that marginalized, oppressed people have access to or now don't have access to. So because I disagree with, let's say, the gender conversation, trans conversation, or I disagree with LGBTQ plus conversations, or I disagree with CRT conversations, or whatever I disagree with, because I shook hands with a bunch of people and dummy Kevin is now elected, I get a vote in that. And that's where we need to be very careful about. And the reason why I bring that up is this is affecting our schools, it's affecting our libraries, it's affecting our access points, our society. I mean, honestly, here locally, like some of the people that are in positions of power don't believe in climate change. So they're battling just cooling spaces, like postage stamp grass spaces where people can sit and just enjoy a piece of grass, right? There's a huge fight because of the disagreement of climate change, because of a postage stamp grass. So honestly, in talking about these heavy subjects, um, I'm going to steal Oprah's statement where she said, "We live in complex times and we have very complex issues which demand mature conversation with mental intelligence, emotional intelligence, and not denial." That's what brings us into chapter 6. And just briefly talking about just chapter 6, because chapter 6 of this book was just storytelling. But honestly, it brought up two groups. And I want to talk about one group because I was this one group for a while. And I can be honest with that. These two authors talk about 75% of the people that were interviewed of the religion of whiteness that identified with the original religion of whiteness, 75% of those interviewed were what they call the white veil group. And the white veil group is there's no whiteness. I don't see color. There's no white privilege. All people matter. There's just people, right? And so that's the work or the narrative of the white veiled group. But then you have the white might group, and that was about 25% of the religion of whiteness interviewed. That they're the white might group, white might group,
Yeah.
might. This the only that's in their view, race and racial disadvantage are ubiquitous in America, but it is the whites who are the victims, right? So these are the ones that are more aggressive, right? They're the ones with the big truck on the back, hanging off of the stinger hitch is a nice hefty set of testicles with guns and flags on vinyl stickers on their windows with a "Don't Tread on Me" flag, and we're just blasting, crop dusting walkers along the road with our diesel smoke, right? That's the stereotypical what I am viewing. We're defending honor, we're defending our faith. I mean, this insecurity oozes from them, but here these are the white might people. Honestly, I don't want to. I mean, they're dangerous people, I would say, because it can get very dangerous. This is where we get the alt-right people. This is where we get the radicals. This is where we get white supremacy groups. Very dangerous set of people. But honestly, you don't see on a daily basis that group of people are not really. I mean, they're integrated in society. They come in, they work alongside of you and such, but they're only 25% of those that were interviewed.
Which is still
70
quite a bit.
What?
Which is still quite a bit.
It's quite a bit. They're
That's a
loud.
big chunk.
They're angry. But honestly, I think that the white might people are easily picked out.
They're picked out, and the scary thing though is what they go on to talk about in the book is that the white veil people in times of strife and struggle will side with the white might.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
So the white might people, I would say, literally wear the propaganda of white might on their shirts and hats.
It might be a rooster. You never know.
It's just that person walking around that just, kneel to the cross, pray or
salute the flag.
Salute the flag, kneel to the cross. It's that kind of stuff. It's Christian nationalism type ideas and such. But it's the white veil group. These are the people that are like in denial. Politically, they're kind of like a group of people that are unhappy with all political candidates. So they just are like they're indecisive in their behavior. They're not able to just take a stand. They're the ones that kind of probably came up with all lives matter type statements and things like that. And so,
color.
Say again.
I don't see color.
I don't see color. I'm colorblind. Just kind of almost like positive Paul, positive Polly, Pollyanna type, attitude about, there's nothing really going on. It's almost like an illusion that racial inequality doesn't exist, and it's a denial of that. Now, it's very easy to get wrapped up in that language. Why? Because racial segregation was for the 1960s and before. That's not for today. And that work was done then, right? So that those markers in history are seen as corrective, and they were corrective to a point, but the work is not done. When you have a country that was built on racial segregation and literally slaves were brought here to work our capitalistic economy. Honestly, when you have a country built on the backs of that, there's deep-rooted challenges that last for a very long time. That just doesn't go away in a handful of years in a ratification of a law. So, give me your thoughts.
I think we're going along with it as well. When people look back at MLK, what we're told is a peaceful protester that got shot by a black person as well. And so it's definitely a whitewashed story, where MLK was probably murdered because of his economic policies,
right?
Not because of his racial policies.
Mm-hmm.
He was pushing for a minimum wage for every person, working or not. It's just a wage to be human. And so,
let me correct what you just said. You said MLK was shot by a white person.
I don't think so.
Let me look it up. Let's be correct. Let's be correct in what we're saying here.
Sure.
I mean, it's just a small detail. James Earl Ray.
Am I wrong?
Assassination of Martin Luther King at the Lorraine Hotel, Memphis, Tennessee.
Never mind. I guess he was white. My apologies. Died of hepatitis C.
White, but I get what you're saying.
Go ahead.
Yeah, what you're saying still stands. I just heard that and I was like, wait a minute. Yeah. But what you're saying still stands. It doesn't negate what you're saying, is that MLK was a kind of a peaceful protester.
But he wasn't.
Yeah, there was some radical stuff going on.
And
definitely. And it was getting more radical.
And so our white veil is to try to demilitarize or like de-violence or like make him as white as possible.
Right.
Yeah. Well, another similarly, I think those of us who were not alive in the 60s and the desegregation process, we tend to look back because we have those stories and we have like these warm, fuzzy feelings toward Martin Luther King Jr. But the reality is he was one of the most hated men in America at the time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really important to reckon with that as well. That as white people, if we were to be experiencing these same things now, we wouldn't have those same warm, fuzzy feelings.
Yeah. And so, Malcolm X was slain by supposedly 2 African-American males.
Mm-hmm.
My apology. I got the wrong one.
No, it's fine. What you were saying still stands. I'm not debating what you were saying because I get it. I get that story, but MLK is an iconic figure for racial injustice and the movement towards racial justice. And what he was talking about, honestly, we only have a few quotes, and we only listen to "I Have a Dream." And that's the only part of that speech that most people know. And we don't, we're not listening to what it was going to actually take to help marginalized people to rise. And there were deep philosophies and religiosities that were required to help oppressed people to rise. And that's something that for some reason, when MLK died and schools were desegregated, it was almost like, and certain things were written into law. It's almost like we thought, okay, that fixes everything, and wash our hands. We're done with that now. And honestly, the white veil group kind of has that attitude.
Well, I mean, if you look at why private schools, especially Christian private schools, most of them were founded during that period of desegregation, so that the white veil group, we'll call this, could still have their own schools.
Right.
And
Yep.
so the segregation is still very alive and well.
Mm-hmm.
Is it
Yeah.
is it as prominent or as like visual? I think most people would just blame it on where people decide to live at. But it's
But even
more-
that decision is based on a lot of factors.
Yeah.
There was a time when we were planting a church, and before we met formally as a congregation on a Sunday morning or a group meeting, we were attending all different kinds of churches. And one of the churches that I just loved to attend was a predominantly Black church. And the message that was being spoken, racial injustice, was woven through the fabric of the entire service about reconciling racial injustice. That was woven through the songs, through the liturgy, through the sermon. I never heard anything like that before. Probably the closest that I ever heard it from was Barack Obama's pastor when he got to national news and was accused of, hating America and some of the things that he was saying. But you could tell it was the same type of liberation type theology where it was woven through the fabric of the sermon. So when a Black Christian, African American Christian, or a person of color that's a Christian, their messages and their desire for messages are, statistically, this book has shown that they're completely different. And even the words of minister of reconciliation, that definition, according to this statistical analysis, is also completely different. And even why Jesus came and the focus of there's no male, female, Jew or Greek, and that statement of equality, those focus ideas are completely different in churches that are predominantly people of color. That's what this book has shown. For some reason, in white churches, we're in complete denial that there's groups of people that even are experiencing marginalization. And that honestly is the white veil group. The white veil group, since they're so statistically dominant in the religion of whiteness, they're just kind of turning their eye to that and not wanting to acknowledge, and we'll just like pretend like that doesn't exist. And if we just speak equality, then we'll be equal. Or if we just pretend like God, we don't pretend like God created all people equal. We just declare that God created all people equal with our words, then all people will somehow be equal. And when they're not, it's a God problem, and we just kind of lift that up. So I think there's a lot to consider here, because honestly, there's a lot for me to consider just personally. And if anybody that listens to this wants to reach out to me personally, you're welcome to. Just send me a DM on, Facebook or whatever. Send me a DM. Will I accept your attacks? I'm not going to accept any attacks, right? Just decline, delete. If you want to have a mature conversation that leads somewhere, more than happy.
If they got to this far in an hour and a half that we've been talking,
yeah, exactly.
They may not be listening to this point.
That's true. So but this public service announcement probably hit what this book calls the remnant. This book actually calls the group of people, the three of us sitting here, wanting to resurrect our faith and wanting to hold on to some semblance of Christianity that is addressing real world injustices, issues of poverty and marginalization and racism and women's rights and all these things that we've talked about on this, that we're the remnant. Everyone else is trapped into calling each other Marxist liberals and woke and all this fighting out here somewhere. This is the remnant of Christianity that actually wants to have mature conversations that builds a worldview of Jesus and what Jesus was teaching. So if you want to reach out to us, DM us, make sure, drop in our DMs something, contact information or whatever, and we'll have a mature conversation. I have lived in areas. I am white. You can tell. It's no surprise but I have lived in areas, right, that I've never lived in predominantly Black neighborhoods. I've lived adjacent. I've lived near what people say, well, the Black gangs, right? And so some people's image of Black communities are just riddled with gangs. Well, I've lived next and adjacent to some of these areas that, have received national attention. I've also lived in very predominantly white areas where racism was never talked about, kind of like the white veil. So I've lived in a community that is completely white veil, but I've also lived in a community that is militant white might. And I've lived in near and adjacent to people that are white supremacists and white. So I have an interesting geographic story of different places that I've been, spent time, lived, and been around where I have been exposed to a lot of racism. Mm-hmm. I've been exposed to some deep, difficult, just trash, what I would consider trash philosophy of life. That's just demonic to me. And I've just lived right next door. And so going through this process and trying to just unearth some of these things in me and just trying to bring some of these concepts to life, like what does this mean for my life? I think it's been an important journey just for me personally. Yeah. So if you want to have that discussion with me, with Jake, with Shreya, reach out to us and we can. We have one more week, part 4 of the religion of whiteness. I would encourage you to get this. This has been a very important read. Some of it is just narrative form, easy read. And some of it is going to be a baseball bat to the face of, wow, that's hard. And I need to figure that out. So this is good stuff. I love this read. And I hope that you take a deep dive as well. All right, Jake and Shreya,